You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
A good trail horse will respond promptly to your cues. But as we learned in this episode of Barn Stories, a great trail horse knows when it's time to stop for a moment and ask if you really mean it.
Welcome to the Barn Stories podcast. I'm Lori Prinz, editor of Equus Magazine.
And I'm managing editor Christine Barakat.
This podcast features our favorite essays and articles published in Equus over the past 40 years. Although Equus is known for articles on horse care and veterinary research, our editorial mission has always been guided by the bond that exists between horses and people. And each issue has featured a real-life story that celebrates how horses enrich our lives and touch our hearts.
We've searched our archives, chosen the stories that resonated with our readers, and given them new life in this audio format. Longtime subscribers may recognize some of their favorite pieces. And if you're new to the Equus community, these stories will confirm that no matter what sort of saddle you sit in, a deep emotional connection to horses is something we all share.
The essay in this episode explores an experience every rider has had, dealing with a horse who refuses to move forward. Of course, when that happens, our instinct is to become more insistent, usually by increasing the intensity of our aids. But that is not the best approach.
The other option is trying to figure out why the horse doesn't want to go in that particular direction in the first place. The author of this essay describes how she learned this lesson firsthand through a series of trail misadventures, and how those experiences led her to a better appreciation of how much trust she had to place in her horse for them to form a true partnership. It's a message we've all heard before, but this essay really underscores how important it is.
Let's listen to Standing Firm, written by Marion Vermeulen and read by Taylor Autumn.
Stanley is my best friend. My little Palomino gelding has traveled back and forth with me to college, and he's been my partner on many adventures. He often seems to know what I'm thinking, and he's a first-rate trail horse. We're developing a real teamwork. But it wasn't always like that. In the spring of 2010, I'd been riding Stanley for only about 6 months, mostly in an indoor arena. He was still very green, but he impressed me with his patience, willing attitude, and quick mind. That summer, I brought him home to Michigan, and we began exploring all the local trails. One day, we were following an old spur off the railroad track in the woods. It was a piece of trail that I hadn't explored before, and it slowly dwindled, leaving us bashing through the underbrush. At one point, I asked Stanley to head through a thicket of bushes into a leaf-filled depression, but he hesitated and looked uncertain. It was the first time he had ever been unwilling to go where I had asked him to, and I urged him forward. He argued still, but I softly urged him on, keeping his nose pointed in the direction I had chosen, until he finally complied.
No one knows your horse's thoughts, emotions, and moods as well as you. Just as in touch as you are with their personality, Sentinel's expert nutritionists are in tune with their dietary needs. With feeds in the form of extruded nuggets to provide exceptional nutrition and formulas made for every life stage and activity level, Sentinel's wide choice of carefully crafted feeds makes it easy to find the perfect fit to better your horse's health. Learn more at feedsentinel.com/health. That's feedsentinel.com/health.
As we stepped into the depression, Stanley promptly sank into thick muck. He lunged his way out and stood nervously, with black mud all the way up his legs. I apologized sincerely, patted him, and we found a new route to continue our ride. A couple of years later, Stanley and I found ourselves leading guests on trail rides through the rocky foothills of Roosevelt National Park in Colorado. Stanley grew up a lot during our sojourn in the West. My slightly clumsy young trail horse was becoming a tough, confident mountain pony, expertly guiding his string of horses over the rocky trails. On days off, we would head into the pine forest, spending hours alone in the wilderness. On one such trip, we came across a wide, flat area covered in a carpet of leaves. I asked Stanley to cross it, and he refused. I urged, he obeyed, and once again, we sank into deep mud. Back home, in the summer of 2015, I was riding Stanley along a dirt road when I decided to take a trail through some trees. Stanley went readily down the shoulder into a fairly deep ditch, but stopped dead a few feet from the bottom. As in the past, Stanley rarely refused my direction. So this time I drew on the experiences from our past rides and gave him the benefit of the doubt. We climbed back up and continued down the road. Several yards later, I noticed a deer trail heading down into the ditch I had just tried to cross. The deer tracks had sunk deep into black, wet mud. We riders talk a lot about gaining the trust of our horses and earning their respect. Yet, we must also learn to trust them enough to sometimes give them a say in the decision-making process. This is difficult. It's natural to fear that if you give a horse too much freedom, they'll try to take advantage of you. Yet, what I am slowly learning from Stanley is that if I try to understand his reason, he usually has a very good one. The more I learn, the more I realize that when a horse offers you unexpected or unwanted behavior, they may be trying to tell you something. Whether you allow their message to influence your decision is your choice. But give it a go sometime. You might just be pleased that you did.
Thanks for listening to Barn Stories. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have a favorite article or essay from the Equus archives that you'd like us to feature in a future podcast, let us know. You can reach us at equusbarnstories, all one word, @gmail.com. Did you enjoy this episode of Barn Stories? Head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Thanks for listening. The Barn Stories podcast is a production of the Equine Podcast Network, an entity of the Equine Network.